You know, most people think of Jimi Hendrix as some kind of myth, a flash of psychedelic lightning, but that's just too easy. It kind of lets us off the hook. The truth, it's way more systematic, way more engineered. Today, we're going to deconstruct that myth to find the equation. We're going to look right past the fire and the feedback to uncover the cold, hard system of a man who used precision to master chaos. And in doing that, he engineered his own sonic dominance.
Our story, it doesn't start with a chord, it starts with a sacrifice. It's one of those moments that's so iconic, it feels like it has to be fake, but it was a very real, very deliberate announcement that the rules of music were about to be rewritten.
Look, this wasn't just showmanship, not at all. It was a calculated statement. Hendrix knew, on a level that most artists never even get close to, that talent by itself is just potential. To really, truly break through, to force a world that doesn't care to pay attention, you have to do something they can never, ever forget.
So picture the scene. It's the summer of love. The air is just thick with idealism. And on stage is this 24-year-old from Seattle who's about to completely redefine what his instrument can do. After just a blistering version of Wild Thing, he kneels down, almost like he's in a prayer, completely lost in a trance. But this isn't reverence. No, this is a ritual.
As he douses his guitar in lighter fluid and strikes a match, the crowd just sees a spectacle, right? A crazy stunt. But for Hendrix, this was something profound. He was burning the instrument to prove that the music wasn't in the wood and the strings. It was inside of him. He was making a leap from just being a guitar player to becoming a true sonic disruptor. He had to sacrifice the symbol to become the source.
And right there, in those flames, this equation was forged. This is the framework for absolutely everything that followed. It wasn't just random noise and wild energy. It was a deliberate mix of meticulous, almost scientific precision with the untamable energy of pure chaos. And together, they didn't just create music, they created absolute dominance over the stage, the sound, and everyone's idea of what was possible.
An explosion like that doesn't come from nowhere. That moment of absolute, fiery defiance, that was just the final spark. The powder keg had been filling up his entire life. To understand the fire, we have to go back, way back. We have to go back to the silence.
So, to understand the man who would become the loudest guitarist in the world, you first have to understand the silent world he came from, because the fuel for all that fire was refined in the quiet desperation of his childhood.
For the first decade of his life, Johnny Allen Hendrix, that was his name then, was a child of chaos. His parents, Al and Lucille, they were trapped in this just brutal cycle of poverty and alcoholism. Their home wasn't a home, it was a war zone. And in that war zone, Jimmy learned that his voice just didn't matter. So he retreated into a self-imposed vibrating silence.
Just think about this contrast for a second. Outside, there was all this noise, shouting, fighting, a family just falling apart. But inside, for Jimmy, who was hiding in a closet to escape it all, there was only silence. This created this deep, foundational frustration. He wasn't just shy, he was described as a volcano with no vent. Can you imagine that pressure just building and building with no way to speak your truth, no way to be heard? He even started carrying a broomstick around, pretending it was a guitar, trying to make sound where there was none.
1. That's the number of strings on a ukulele he found in a trash can. This wasn't a toy. It was the first tool he ever had to fight back. It was his first weapon against the silence. And he learned to play that single string with so much intensity that he could make it sound like a whole band, pouring all of that frustration into one single, solitary note.
And the world just kept trying to put him back in a cage. His own father forced him to play right-handed, calling his natural left-handedness the sign of the devil. So Jimmy just practiced in secret, flipping a right-handed guitar upside down. Later in the army, he wasn't really a soldier. He was a paratrooper so obsessed he'd practice in the latrines while his whole platoon slept. And then on the Chitlin circuit, which was like the established path for black musicians, he was fired again and again for being too much. Too loud, too flashy, too different. Every one of these so-called failures taught him the exact same lesson. The world's rules were not designed for him. To survive, he had to engineer his own.
And this brings us to his solution. This is the part where Hendrix stops being a victim of his circumstances and becomes the architect of his own reality. He stops reacting and he starts engineering. This was his core philosophy. This wasn't about feeling the music in some vague, mystical way. Nope. It was about control. It was about understanding sound on an almost scientific level. He realized that the very thing people called noise, the feedback, the distortion, the chaos, it was all just a frequency.
And if it's a frequency, it can be measured, it can be mapped, and it can be controlled. He was going to become its master. So this led him to develop what's been called the 1-minute rule. He didn't see a performance as a set. He saw it as a battle for validation. His goal was to be so technically overwhelming in the first 60 seconds that any doubt, any resistance from the audience was just completely broken. It wasn't about entertaining them, it was about establishing absolute, undeniable control from the very first note.
So, how did he do it? It all began with his systems. The first one was mechanical inversion. Remember how he was forced to play a right-handed guitar upside down? Well, that wasn't a quirk. It became a systematic advantage. On a flipped guitar, the string tensions are all inverted. The low strings have more room to vibrate, which gives them this deeper, looser growl, while the high strings are tighter, allowing for sharper, more aggressive bends. He turned a constraint into a totally unique sonic signature.
Next up was stage mapping. Those wild squeals and howls of feedback that sounded so spontaneous? Nope, totally planned. During soundcheck, while other bands were just jamming, Hendrix would meticulously walk the stage, marking X's on the floor with tape. Each X marked a specific spot where he could stand to trigger a precise frequency of feedback from his amps. He wasn't getting lucky, he was standing on a pre-calculated coordinate. He was playing the entire stage like it was an instrument.
And finally, maybe the most important part of all, was selective obsession. He didn't just practice, he fused with his instrument. I mean, he slept with it, ate with it, was never without it. The goal was something called neuromuscular certainty, a state where his brain didn't even have to tell his fingers what to do. The connection was just instantaneous. The guitar stopped being a tool he was holding and became a physical extension of his body. It was a limb. So all of this, the childhood pain, the relentless engineering, the fusion with his instrument, it all culminates in the ultimate application of his equation. It's one of the most powerful musical statements of the entire 20th century.
Just look at this timeline. It's absolutely meteoric. I mean, in 1966, he's getting fired for being too much. Just 1 year later, he's setting the world on fire at Monterey, and by 1969, he is the undisputed headliner of Woodstock, the defining event of his whole generation. This isn't luck. This is the direct result of his equation being put into practice.
On that muddy field in upstate New York, Hendrix took the stage and did something absolutely nobody expected. He played the American national anthem. But this was not just another cover song. This was a full-scale deployment of the Hendrix Equation. Precision plus chaos equals dominance. And the result was staggering. Using his mastery of feedback and distortion, the very noise he had learned to engineer, he completely transformed the anthem. He didn't just play the notes, he deconstructed the song and rebuilt it as a commentary on the Vietnam War. He made his guitar sound like rockets, like falling bombs, like the screams of a nation in turmoil. He turned a song of patriotism into the voice of a generation in pain.
It was a total transformation. The kid who was so quiet he had to mime playing on a broomstick became the sonic shaman of his era. The musician who was told to just be a background player became the ultimate lead force. The boy who was ignored became the man who was completely, utterly unignorable. He turned a world that couldn't hear him into one that couldn't stop listening.
And that is where this story stops being about him and starts being about us. Because the principles behind his journey are universal. This is about way more than just music.
The big lesson here is that you don't need to wait for permission to change the rules. You don't have to tone yourself down or fit into some pre-existing box to be effective. The very things that make you too much, your intensity, your obsession, your unique way of seeing things, those are not weaknesses. They are the raw materials for your own equation.
So let's bring it all back. We started with a silent child, frustrated and unheard. We saw him face a world of constraints that tried to keep him in a box, but instead of accepting it, he engineered a new reality. He built a system of precision to control the chaos, and he transformed his pain into unbelievable power.
So this brings us to the final question. What is your guitar? What is that one skill, that one craft, that one obsession that you can master so completely, so thoroughly, that the world has no choice but to stop and look and listen? What is the thing you can sharpen until it makes you undeniable? Because ultimately, this isn't about fame or applause or even about music. It's about a decision. It's about the conscious, deliberate, and powerful decision to never be ignored again.